Okay, so thanks again to Sean for a fantastic session this morning, looking at network analysis and some really interesting stuff there around potential ways in which you can visualize to better understand various connections within systems. So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking to you about a simulation method known as agent-based simulation. Sometimes referred to as individual-based modeling, and particularly a piece of software called MESA, which is a Python library that allows us to build agent-based simulations actually really easily within Python. Traditionally, a lot of the methods you've seen so far, when we looked at discrete event simulation, we thought of our simulations as essentially modeling queuing problems and entities flowing through queues within our system. With system dynamics, we looked very much at the system itself, and we talked about how the dynamics of the system and the structure of the system were the things of interest. An agent-based simulation is almost right at the other end of the spectrum. Agent-based simulation is all about the individuals themselves that are flowing through your system in some way. So agent-based simulation basically is a simulation method that where the focus is on behavior, the interactions, the motivations of the individuals within the system that you're modeling. And what's really of interest when you're using agent-based simulation is the emergent behavior that arises from relatively simple individual level rules. So individuals who are behaving and interacting in a certain way, following usually pretty simple rules, but then you're very interested in what happens at a population level. How does that scale up, and how does that affect the population level dynamics that we're seeing? And agent-based simulation is commonly used in ecology, and there it's known much more by its alternative title of individual-based modeling. And in ecology, it's used to do things about foraging systems. So you can use agent-based or individual-based modeling in order to try and capture the way in which animals forage for food and those behaviors and how that scales up to change the population level dynamics of a collection of animals. So it's used really extensively in ecology. It's also extensively used in modeling disease spread and outbreaks in public health. And of course, that's something we're all unfortunately very familiar with at the moment. And indeed, the example that I'm going to be getting you to build over the course of these sessions in this module will be looking at exactly that, using agent-based simulation to try and model disease spread. I have to say that it's not the only method that's used, and a lot of the, as far as we've seen, a lot of the models that have been used by SAGE, etc., in the COVID outbreak have been generally sort of purely mathematical models rather than these kinds of models, but they are used for this kind of thing, and you'll hopefully see why that is. And another slightly odd thing to get your head around is that agent-based simulation differs from conventional mathematics. And what do I mean by that? Agent-based simulation, this kind of way of building things up from relatively simple individual level rules has been put forward as an alternative to conventional mathematics. There are things that conventional maths can't explain. So, for example, the formation of a snowflake can't be explained using conventional mathematics. But these kinds of approaches, where you're looking at things emerging from these very individual level rules, maybe in the case of the atomic level, can actually provide a potential solution as to why we see certain things in nature that can't be explained using conventional mathematics. So what are the elements of an agent-based simulation? Well, first of all, we've got agents, and agents are our things that are moving and interacting within our environment. And the depth in which you go in terms of an agent-based simulation, in terms of describing those movements and those interactions, will vary massively according to what you're modeling. But generally speaking, the level of agent behavior is usually pretty simple in comparison to the population level dynamics that emerge. So we have those individual level behaviors and interactions, and then emergent behavior. That's the outcome. That's the thing that we're interested in from an agent-based model. So much in the same way that a discrete event simulation, the outcomes we're really interested in there are things like, you know, how long do they spend queuing? How long do they spend in the system? What percentage of time is the doctor used for, etc., that kind of thing. In a system dynamics model, as we looked at last week, we're looking at things like what's the general dynamics of the system over time? What are the potential feedback loops that may be causing issues or indeed balancing themselves out in the system? But with an agent-based simulation, it's all about this emergent behavior. Lots and lots of individuals doing their own thing, but then because of that, something interesting is emerging at the population level. So there's a very good example of an agent-based simulation, and that's known as a cellular automaton. Now, a cellular automaton is basically just a type of agent-based models. And in a cellular automaton, essentially you have a grid of cells, and each cell is either alive or dead. And one of the most famous examples of a cellular automaton is John Conway's game of life. And in this game, there are really simple rules. And it's simply these 4 rules that are imposed in the game. The first rule is that any cell that's alive and which has either 0 or 1 neighboring cells, who are also alive, dies from solitude or starvation. So essentially, a cell that's too lonely either is, or it doesn't have enough food, or whatever it may be representing, will die in the next generation. Any living cell with 2 or 3 neighbors will survive. That's considered the sort of right amount. And then any live cell with 4 or more neighbors dies from overpopulation. And then the 4th rule is that any dead cell with 3 neighbors becomes alive. Okay, so don't worry too much about the rules themselves and the meaning to the rules, but these are, as you can see, they're just very, very simple rules. 4 very simple rules. Basically, if you're alive and you've got either no neighbors or 1 neighbor, then you're going to die in the next generation. If you've got 2 or 3 neighbors, you'll survive. But if you've got 4 or more neighbors, then you'll die from overpopulation. And if the cell is dead, but it has 3 neighbors, then it will become alive in the next generation. So just really, really simple rules that we're applying to a grid of cells, essentially. But from those really simple rules, we get some really interesting behavior. Now, I've just, as I was logging into the session, noticed they've changed the link. So apologies, I will upload the correct link here, which is this one here. I've just changed it in my slides that are locally. But this is now the link that you need to use to play John Conway's Game of Life. If you use the old link, it will direct you at the moment to the new site. So let's just have a look at those rules, that game in action. So if you go on here, this is John Conway's Game of Life. So here we've got a grid of cells. The yellow ones are alive, and the grey ones are dead. And so let's just imagine we start with these cells, these 5 cells that are alive. If I click next, that happens. So if we go back to what it was before, so we can see we've got a cell here, and then we've got some cells here. If I click next there, those rules are applied to all the cells. So some cells have died, some cells have been born again. I click next again, we see another iteration, and so on and so on. Now let's just run that through lots and lots of iterations. We see something interesting is happening. We seem to have created some sort of being that is moving through our environment. Now, we at no point told that entity, indeed we didn't declare it was an entity, but we at no point created an entity and said you need to move diagonally down right through this environment. But that's exactly what's happened. And it turns out in many cellular automaton, playing the game of life, that there are lots and lots of these shapes, these entities that emerge. So let's just try drawing some random things. Let's just switch on some cells at random. Let's see what happens. Let's just click. Oh, let's try that. So if we click start now, let's see what happens. Okay, so we're getting morphing shapes, but then all of a sudden we'll start to see some interesting shapes emerging, hopefully. There we are, starting to see one. So you'll start to notice, there we go, there's one of them. Every time you play the game of life, eventually you will start to get these known entities that start to emerge. So this is a spinner, this one here, where you've just got 3 cells that are alternating between being horizontal and vertical. You saw one that was like a firework exploding. That's another one. This one over here that we saw first, that's emerged again. Look, we've given birth to that. That's known as a glider. There are these cells where they just form blocks of 4 that don't do anything until our life forms start absorbing them, and then new things get created, and I've got gliders all over the place. Now, there's some really interesting dynamics happening here, and all we've given this system is those 4 simple rules. But these common elements of these particular shapes, gliders and I'll call it exploders, I can't remember offhand what it's called, the firework one, we'll call it. These shapes are commonly found every time you play this game, regardless of what how you set it up. You'll start to see these things evolve. And that in itself is an interesting emergent behavior, just from really simple rules. So have a, I say I've put the link in there. Do feel free to have a visit of that and read a bit of the explanation, which will give you a bit more information. And there's lots of information, links to other information about John Conway, mathematician who sadly died earlier this year, and about a lot of the theory behind cellular or automata. So that's an example of an agent-based simulation. And even, I was about to say an even better example, another example of an agent-based simulation can be found via this excellent book, which is just £69 on Amazon. I can highly rate the author of this book, great personal friend. And this book will tell you all about the stuff that I did for my PhD, which was exactly looking at using agent-based simulation for modeling foraging behavior. So I'm just going to talk, if you don't want to spend that £69 just yet, I'll just give you a brief overview about what I did in my PhD. So basically, the task for my research was to build a model of bumblebee foraging behavior. And specifically, what we wanted to know, bumblebees are huge pollinators, very significant pollinators in our landscape that can fly huge distances. And there was a concern that if a landscape was introduced with genetically modified crops, whether bees, because they're bumblebees specifically, because they're such significant pollinators, whether their pollination behaviors would lead to non-GM crops essentially becoming contaminated with GM seed and therefore affecting the purity of the non-GM crops. So what we did was to build an agent-based simulation. And we know quite a lot about the way in which bumblebees forage for food. And it's quite different to the way in which honeybees do it. But essentially, bumblebees act on a number of sort of rules in terms of what they're looking to achieve. So they're very energy efficient. They need to fill up with nectar their food as quickly as possible. So they need to do that and then return to the nest. They also have memories. They exhibit behavior known as trap lining, which is where they will follow the same path of flowers around a field once they've found a sort of good path that works for them, which indicates that they A, have memory, and B, that they're exhibiting learning behavior based on their sampling. And of course, the other thing we know about the way in which many animals learn is we know that they are reinforcement learners. Now, Mike will talk to you a lot more about deep reinforcement learning later in the course, which is a fascinating area in itself. But basically, reinforcement learning is all about doing things, learning to do things that give you a reward more and more, and learning to do things where you don't get a reward or are punished or penalized in some way less and less, so that you gradually tend towards an optimal solution. And it's been shown time and time again that animals, many animals do exhibit reinforcement learning behaviors. Indeed, as human beings, when we're growing up, many of us exhibit kind of reinforcement learning behaviors. We learn what we can do, that we're rewarded for good behavior, punished for bad behavior, etc. So that's a fundamental concept. So what we did was to build this model, and in our model, our bumblebees fill up with food as quickly as possible, their nectar, and they're presented with a number of fields, and each of those fields has some flowers in them, and those flowers are essentially binary. They've either got nectar in them or they haven't. And because of that, each field will have a certain percentage of flowers that are full with nectar and a certain percentage that are empty. So what the bee is trying to do in this model is decide where it needs to go at any point. So at each decision point in the model, it's saying, where do I need to go? Shall I stay where I am, or shall I move to another field? And it does this using a reinforcement learning type mechanism, where essentially it's trying to work out how good do I think it is here versus is it worth the movement cost of going somewhere else? Because of course there is a cost with moving fields, not only in terms of it may not be as good as I think it is, and I may be jumping out the frying pan into the fire, but also in terms of the travel costs. I'm going to use energy to move to another field, and they're energy efficient foragers. They don't want to be unnecessarily traveling. That travel time is time that they're not filling with nectar. So you might have a situation in the model where you've got three fields. Field A might be 30% full, field B might be 100% full, and field C might only be 10% full. And obviously the bee doesn't know that. The bee doesn't know the exact percentage of flowers that are full with nectar. What it can do over time is to learn an estimate of how good it thinks each field is. So it might have come to the conclusion that field A, at the moment it thinks is about 50% full, might think that field B is about 70% full, and might think that field C is about 40% full. So it's overestimating a little bit here, but underestimating a little bit in field B, for example. And essentially at each point, it's making a decision. It's saying, do I stay here or do I move? And that's based on what do I think the probability of me finding a full flower here is versus finding one elsewhere, based on my memory. And what's the movement cost of me moving elsewhere? So it might be that I think this field over here is really good, but if this one's good enough, then is it worth me moving? So what we found from that research was that actually we don't believe bumblebees are a risk from cross-pollinating between GM and non-GM, primarily because one of the things that bumblebees do is to stay in a field for a pretty long time. So what they tend to be quite risk averse in that they won't tend to move unless they absolutely have to. And basically, I won't get into the dynamics, but basically the longer a bee spends within a field, the more dilute the pollen they brought in from elsewhere becomes, and so it becomes less of a problem the longer they stay there. The risk is that you get a bee that dances into a field for a certain amount of time, but a relatively brief amount of time, and then literally buzzes off, and then you've got a potential problem with cross-pollination. So we use that model to create a system in which we had an individual or individuals, our bees, that were just following pretty simple behavioral rules based on needing to fill with the nectar as quickly as possible and making judgment calls about whether they should stay or whether they should go based on their estimates of how good things were everywhere. But out of that came some really interesting emergent dynamics, and it's the emergent dynamics that were of interest. So again, it goes back to this idea that agent-based simulation, it's all about the emergent dynamics. And of course, it's widely used in ecology because very often we know lots about how an individual animal might behave because of their motivations, because we know the way in which animals learn, but we may not know how that would scale up at a population level. So that all sounds great. How do we build one of these things? Now, there are a number of software packages out there that allow you to build agent-based simulations. Most of them are pretty expensive, and most of them aren't brilliant. However, there is a fantastic free and open source framework, Python-based framework called MESA that allows you to build pretty easily some agent-based simulations. It's free and open source. It's got really nice visualization capabilities. You can actually visualize what's happening really nicely. I still remember back on my PhD, I coded the B model in Python, and I remember using some pretty primitive graphics, which I remember I was interviewed for BBC Spotlight about the research, and I showed them the model because they wanted to put it up on the screen. And I remember the interviewer looking at me and saying, "Have you got anything better?" To which I had to apologise for my terrible graphical skills. And in the end, I think they just had lots of shots at me looking increasingly serious at various different angles. But nonetheless, the visualization, had I had and been using MESA at the time, then I would have certainly used this, because the visualization on this thing is brilliant. And it's actually really quick and easy to put together agent-based simulation models. Now, I say easy, you obviously have to understand Python, hence why we've been talking to you about Python, because it underpins so many of these methods. And MESA also uses, it's strongly object-oriented in its approach. And so this will be a good demonstration of the kind of object-oriented design approach that we were talking about towards the end of the Python training. And so to install MESA, as hopefully you've all done, I know a couple of you had issues with pip, but we simply use the pip command and say pip install MESA, and that installs it for us. So how is a MESA agent-based model structured? Basically, you have 3 modules within any MESA model. One of them represents the model itself. Sorry, I've just dropped the camera. Basically, that's where we put all of the information about the model, all the details of the model. So within the model module, we'll have a class that would represent each type of agent. So we've got only one type of agent. So if we were modeling a bee, for example, we just have a bee, a class representing a bee. And within that class, for each agent, we would have the relevant agent attributes, so much as you've seen before with agent-based simulation. We'd have a constructor method that would define how to set up, how to establish one of these agents, again, exactly as you've seen before. We would have various methods that would define the things that the agent can do, i.e. moving or other actions, foraging for food, whatever it may be. And we also have a step method. And that's unique to MESA in that what the step method does is it defines which actions will be taken in what order at each time step of the model. So so far you've seen having a constructor and various other methods in your attributes, but in MESA you also need the step method. So there's another method that basically says, okay, all these things at each time step in the model, I want you to do that if that's true, and then do that if that's true, etc. You'll see an example of how that works. Also within the model module, you would have a class for which represents the model itself, and that would consist of whatever model attributes we need. Again, a constructor method to say how to establish the model, and also a step method for the model itself, and that basically defines what needs to happen model-wide at each step. So how does it control the agents within that model? And then the only other thing we need in the model module is a series of functions that will allow us to calculate the results that we want to extract from that. And all of this will basically go into a single .py file. So we'd have we might call it mymodel.py, for example, and we'd put all of that into it. We'd have a class for each of our agents. Usually that would be one agent, but you can have agent-based simulations that have more than one type of agent. You'd have a class for your model, and then various functions to calculate the results. So we'll go into a bit more of this in detail in a moment. Separate to that, you'd have another .py file, a separate module that would represent the run module. And basically all the run module does is it runs the model. And it either does that as a single run or as a batch of runs, as you've seen before when we talked about discrete event simulation. We said it's really important to run a model lots and lots of times. And it can do either of those things with or without live visualization of the model. So what it can actually do, which is really nice, talking about the visualization aspect, it can tell it to start up a web server and then visualize your model running. So you can see what's happening within your agent-based simulation. The third module, your third PI file, would be a server module. Now this is optional because it may be that you don't want that, you don't want the visualization and you don't need it, so you wouldn't need to include that. You'd only need to include this if you do want the visualization. And what the server module does is it basically just launches a server to send data to JavaScript, which will then draw the model live in a web browser. And the good news is if you want to do this, and you're going to see how to do this today, it's actually really easy. The code used for the server module will always be identical every time you want to run that. So each of these modules lives in a separate .py file, and basically we just import the modules and the bits of modules we need into each of them. Now, clearly, most of your stuff is going to go into the model module. That's where you're going to put all the details about how the model works, and then essentially you've got one to describe how it's going to run, and then one optional one if you want to run it live, so you can watch your model environment play out in front of your eyes. So let us imagine a world in which there has been a new disease emerge. Probably not too difficult for most of us, unfortunately. So this disease is spread through close contact with infected individuals. And the probability of someone catching the disease after coming into contact with an infected individual, which is known as the transmissibility, is 20%. The disease lasts on average for 10 days. Now, I will say, I wrote all this before COVID. I built on this for this particular training, but this original exercise was long before we knew about COVID-19. But I think it does nicely demonstrate some of the aspects of agent-based simulation. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a model that models the spread of this disease within the population, because actually disease spread is a really good example of something that's behaving with very simple individual level rules, but which is causing these interesting emergent behaviors. You know, the whole thing about COVID and about planning for this and lockdowns is the idea that it's the individuals, each of us as individuals, that's driving the behavior of the system, the spread of the virus. And so modeling those individual level behaviors so that we can then see what happens emergent at a population scale is really important. So I'm going to show you some code. I'm going to talk you through some code. Don't worry about copying any of this out, because in the first exercise, you're going to have access to everything I've shown you. You'll have the file that contains all this, and then you're just going to add a little bit to it. So the first thing we would do would be to create our model module. And so I've called mine disease_model.py, but I could call it anything. And the first thing, as you are well used to by now, anything you're doing in Python, the first thing you do is always to import the libraries that we need. So in our model module, the first thing we need to do is grab some stuff from MESA that we're going to need. So we import the agent and the model classes, because we're going to be using those to describe what our agent is and what a model is. From MESA.time, we're going to import something called random activation. Now, this is just a way in which we determine the order in which agents take their actions. I'll come on to that in a little while. And then from MESA.space, I love these names, we're going to import something called a multi-grid. And all a multi-grid is a type of grid. We need to put our agents onto some sort of grid. And a multi-grid basically says, I want a type of grid where more than one agent can occupy a cell, i.e. they can be in the same place, which obviously if you're doing disease modeling is probably what you want, because you want to model where people are coming together, and that's where the disease spread's happening. We're also going to import something from MESA.data collection called a data collector. I will come on to that later. For now, just know that that's something you'll need to import, but it's used to collate results, and it's really, really useful. It saves you a lot of doing the legwork yourself. It does a lot of this stuff for you. I'm also going to import the random library, which you're probably well used to using by now, and we're going to use that in a few places. So just some sort of simple imports there, first of all. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to write our agent class. So we're only going to have one type of agent, and this agent is going to represent a person. So in our agent class, we're going to have a number of functions or methods that will define what our agents do. So we're going to need a function to tell agents how to move. We're going to need a function to tell agents about how to infect other people, and a method that essentially defines all of the things to do at each tick of the clock, i.e. the step method that I was talking about a moment ago. But of course, as you well know from object-oriented programming, we always have to have a constructor in our class description as our first method, our dunder method, double underscore init double underscore. So what we're going to do in the constructor is we'll specify the attributes that we want to set. Remember when we talked about object-oriented programming, we said the constructor essentially assembles the object, an instance of that object from the class blueprint. So we're going to use the constructor. We're going to get it to put this our person together, and we'll get it to set up the transmissibility, the level of movement of the agent, the average disease duration, and whether or not the agent's infected already at the start of the model, according to some probability that we specify. So let's have a look at what our constructor might look like for this. Now, it's actually much simpler than it appears here, because I've got lots and lots of comments included, and as I say, you'll have a copy of this code, so don't worry too much. I'm just going to talk you through the basics. The first thing you can do, if we look at the declaration of the class here, so I've called my agent person agent, just in case I decide to throw in any other kind of agent later down the line. Now, you'll also remember back from the object-oriented programming lecture that we talked about the idea of inheritance. And we said inheritance is really useful in object-oriented programming because we can say, I want an agent class that's mostly like an agent, but it's also got these differences. And that's essentially what we're doing here. We're inheriting from agent and then just adding on our own bits. And this is the beauty of using MESA, because MESA's already defined what an agent is in an agent-based simulation. It's defined what a model is. All of this stuff is defined. We don't have to worry about defining any of that from scratch. So we simply say that we want a new class called person agent, and it should inherit from the MESA agent class. So we want one of those things, but we're just going to extend it to our particular needs. So then, of course, we set up the constructor. So into the constructor, I'm passing in all of the things that I'm going to need to set up this agent. So I'm going to give it a unique ID because that's useful so that we can keep track of individual agents within our model. I'm going to pass in the model itself. That's the model in which it's going to operate. I'm going to pass in the initial infection, which is basically just going to indicate whether or not the probability that the agent is going to be infected at the start when it's first created. The transmissibility, remember that's the probability that if somebody's infected, they pass it on to someone else. The level of movement, here that represents, so I've just had it represent the probability that on any time step of the model that this agent will move somewhere else. And the mean length of the disease. So on average, how long do people have the disease? So this is all the information I need in order to set up my agent. And you remember when we talked about inheritance back in the object-oriented programming lecture, that I said one of the beautiful things that we can do is the first thing we can do is say, yeah, set up set up my class here by using the parent constructor. Do all of that stuff first, and I'll just tell you the new stuff. And we use the super command to do that by saying, so in this case, the parent class is agent. So we're inheriting everything from agents. So we don't need to write out huge reams of code to explain to Python what we mean by an agent. We say, agent, do your thing, set up your constructor, And the agent just simply needs two things. It needs a unique identifier, which we've passed in here, and it needs a model in which to live, and we've passed that in here. So with those two things, that's the only thing a MESA agent needs. So we can call the constructor of the parent agent class to do all that first. And then we can do all the stuff that's unique to our agent, which is a person agent. And of course, this will vary depending on what your model is and what your agents are. But in this case, we want to set up these attributes. So here, I've set up the transmissibility to be whatever the transmissibility was that I passed in. Remember, that's the probability that somebody passes this on to someone else. The level of movement, probability that they will move on any given time step. I've set that to whatever it was being passed in. The average duration to be infected, again, set that to be whatever it was passed in. Oops. Sorry. So we've set those things up. The next thing we need to do is decide whether or not this agent is going to be infected at the start of the model, because we're going to need some agents to be infected. Because if we start with nobody infected, then it's not going to be a very interesting disease spread model because nobody's infected with it. So we need to have at least some people within the model who are infected. So what we're going to do here, the way I've done that, is basically just to have an initial infection probability, and then to basically roll the dice and see whether each agent is infected with this probability. So in the same way that we've done this before, where we've essentially passed in a probability and then used random.uniform to generate a random number on the uniform distribution. But remember, the uniform distribution, equal chance of any number being selected between 0 and 1 in this case. So we can use that and then say, well, if that's less, if the number you pick is less than this threshold I passed in, then we'll say that it's true that they are infected. Otherwise, they won't be infected. So if that was 20%, then there's a 20% chance that this will be set to true. Otherwise, for the remaining 80% of values that could have been randomly selected, then they wouldn't be infected. So we use the if statement here, as you've seen before. If it is true, if we decide that they are going to be infected at the start, then we set their infected attribute here, which I've just called self.infected, to true. So this is just a Boolean that indicates whether or not they're infected. And also, if they're infected, we also need to decide how long they're going to be infected, how long they're going to have this. So I'm going to calculate it here. And the way I do this is I'm just going to sample from an exponential distribution in the same way you did for the discrete event simulation, where we said, we'll work out how long, randomly sample from an exponential distribution based on a mean that we pass in, how long they're going to spend with the nurse, or how long they'll spend with the doctor, or whatever it may be. So here it's how long they're going to have the disease. We've got the mean that we've passed in. So we'll sample from an exponential distribution. And remember, in Python, to specify the exponential distribution, we call random.expovariate. And we need to pass in lambda, which is 1 over the mean. So 1.80 divided by the mean that we've passed in and we've got stored against the agent. So by doing that, we can then work out how long they're going to have the disease. Now you'll also see I've just added in a rounding function to this as well, because this is going to randomly generate a floating point number. That is, it's going to have a number of decimal places. But of course, if our time unit in the model is in days, which it will be for this model, we can't really model 2.3 days because we're only stepping forward 1 day at a time. So I'm going to round this, whatever number this has been sampled to, I'm going to round that to 0 decimal places so that it will round according. So if it samples 2.8, then it'll say, okay, it's 3 days. They've got this disease for 3 days. If it's sampled 2.1, then it would select 2 days. So just make sure that we're only dealing with disease duration in whole numbers of days. So that's all what will happen if we decide this agent will be infected at the start. If we decide they're not going to be infected, then all we do is just set their infected Boolean to false. We don't need to do anything else. So that's all we've done in the constructor. We've passed in this information. We've called the parent class constructor to say, do your thing, define what an agent is. Here's the ID we're going to use for this agent. Here's the model they're going to live in. and then set up these things: the transmissibility, the level of movement, the average length of the disease, and then work out whether or not they're infected, and if they are, then update the things accordingly. So another thing we need to do, as well, once we've got our agent set up, we need to tell agents how to move within our model. So we need to write a movement function in the person agent class that will specify how our agents are going to move around this grid of cells in our environment. So what we're going to do in this model, we're just going to have our agents moving to a random neighboring cell. Okay, so we could put in something far more detailed about how and when certain agents would move, but just for this, we're just going to assume they just move to one of the random neighboring cells. And we're going to include diagonals. That's known as the more neighborhood when we're looking at a grid. So they've basically got 8 options. If they decide to move, they're going to move in one of these 8 directions. We're going to choose one of those at random. And remember, because we're using a multi-grid, because we want agents to be in more than one cell at a time to infect each other, then we're allowing more than one agent per cell. So all we need to do for this movement function, first of all, is to work out what the possible locations are based on whatever the cells are around this agent. And then we're going to pick one of those at random and then tell the model to move the agent to that cell. So look at what are my options, pick one of those at random, and then move. That's basically what we need the move function to do. Now the move function will assume that the agent has been told to move, and we'll come on to later that they may not always move at each step. Remember, we specified a level of movement. But this move method will only be called if they have been told you're going to move. And so if they've been told to move, they're going to have to move out of their cell to one of these 8, and they're going to pick it around. So here's how we'd set that up. Again, within our agent class, within our person agent class, we set up a new method. I've just called it move. And here we're just going to do these very simple things. So the first thing I'm going to do is look, remember we said we need to find out what the possible movement locations are. So we can use a method of the grid class within MESA to be able to do this really easily. So we can get a list of the possible locations by calling .getNeighborhood from the self.model.grid. So remember, we've passed in the model to the agent. So I remember self refers to this agent in particular, this instance of agent. And so it's saying for this agent, their model that we've passed in, the model in which they live, the grid in which that's in this model, get the neighborhood. So tell me what the surrounding cells are. And here, I've specified a number of inputs that I'm passing in to get that neighborhood. So I've given it the position of the agent. So self.pos says return the position of this particular agent, wherever they are, because it needs to know that if it's going to tell you what the neighboring cells are. I've said more equals true, because we want a more neighborhood where we include the diagonals. We don't just want to include the 4 cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west. And I don't want to include the center as a possible location, because the center is where I am. And if I've been told to move, then staying where I am is not an option. That's not a valid movement location. So this says, find me the cells that I could move to. Here's my position. I want a more neighborhood where I include diagonals, but don't include the center where I am currently. Once we've got that, that will be stored in a list called possible steps. And then all I need to do is choose one of those at random. So you've seen this before, where we can use the random.choice method to randomly choose an item from a list. That's all we're doing here. We're saying random.choice, and passing in the list possible steps. And then I'm going to store that choice in new position. So here we've identified the possible locations. Here we've randomly selected one of those, which is now stored in new position. Last thing I need to do is just tell the agent to move. And fortunately, MESA has a built-in move agent function that allows us to do exactly that. So I can simply say the self.model.grid.move agent, that's the function we need, and it just takes in 2 inputs, self, i.e. to represent it's me that's moving, me as in this instance of the agent, and I need to give it the location I'm going to move to, which is the new position, which we've picked up here. So that's all there is to it. Here and obviously this will differ depending on if you're doing an agent-based model in reality. You might have a different way in which you want your agents to move, but the principle will remain the same. You'd find the possible locations, you'd then select one of those locations, and then you'd move to that location. And that's all this is doing. As well as moving, we also need our agents to infect other people. So we're going to need a function to specify how that works. Now, the way we're going to set up infection in our model is if a person's infected and they're in the same location as non-infected people, then there's a probability that the infected person is going to infect each of the non-infected individuals. That's the concept of transmissibility. So remember we said back for this disease, I think we said 20%. Yeah. So we said for our disease, basically the probability that if you're infected that you'll pass it on to somebody who's not infected is 20%. So for each uninfected person they come into contact with, there's a 20% chance they will infect that person. So how are we going to model this? What we'll do here is we'll first get a list of all the agents in the current cell. Okay. If there's more than one, i.e. more than just the current agent, then what we'll do is we'll go through each agent in that cell, and if they're not already infected, we'll decide whether or not they're going to be infected. And we'll do that by randomly sampling, and we'll also, if they do get infected, just as we did when we set up our new agent, if they were infected at the start, we'll randomly sample how long they're going to have this disease for. Now, the reason we're selecting if there's checking if there's more than one, obviously if there's only one agent in the cell, i.e. me, then I can't infect anyone because there's no one else there. So that's really important. We need to check that there are other people in the cell, otherwise there's no point going on, we can't infect anyone. So this is what that might look like. So here I've just created a method again in the person agent class called infect. The first thing we're going to do is grab a list of what I've called the cellmates. These are basically other agents that are currently occupying this same cell. And again, MESA has us covered for this because it's already got a nice function. This is why MESA is so beautiful for this. We don't have to tell it how to work out whether there are other people in the same grid cell. We've got a function that allows us to do that. And that function is called get cell list contents. And the only thing we need to pass into that is our current position. So remember, self.pols will give the current position of the agent. So we pass that in, and this method will simply say, tell me who's in this cell. Tell me who's in the cell, and the cell I want you to look at is the cell where I am. Okay, that's what it's doing. And by calling that method, it will then return a list, and I've called that list cellmates. So that's all we're doing here, calling that method, saying who's in this cell, and the cell I mean is whatever cell I'm in. That could be anything, but in this particular example, I'm saying in the cell in which I am. Get my get the list of contents for that particular cell. That will include me as well. So remember, that's going to include the fact that I'm in the cell. So I need to take that into account. Once we've got that list, remember that we said we need to check whether there's more than one agent in that cell. Because if it's just me alone, then I can't infect anyone because there's nobody else there. So because we've now got this list of who's in this particular cell, then the first thing I can do is just check if that list is length more than one. Because if it's not, then it's just me, and I don't need to go any further. I can't infect anyone if there's nobody else there. So if it is more than one, that's when I'm going to need to start doing my more intricate checks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the cellmates in turn. So here I'm using a for loop, and I'm saying for each inhabitant in the cellmate. So for each cellmate that you've identified, each agent, that will again include me. So if there's two of us, if there's me and someone else, then that will include both of us. Excuse me, sorry, the doorbell's just going. My wife's on the lecture. Hi guys, sorry about that. My apologies. The trouble of having both me and my wife on calls at the same time. Hopefully everyone's still there. Someone's still there? Confirm you're there?
Yeah, you're all good, Dan. You're all good.
It's all very quiet.
Yeah, I assume everybody.
I'll assume you're there and you can hear me. Someone just confirm that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, all here, thanks.
Yes,
well,
we all here.
I am.
Oh, I think my volume is playing up. Just 1 second, sorry. I'm having technical issues. Apologies, 1 moment.
Is this where we all start whispering?
Okay, can someone just pop in Slack to say that you can hear me? Because oh, hang on, I may be able to see in the chat. No, I can't get it.
Can you hear me, Terry?
Brilliant, thank you, Sean. At least you can hear me, but apologies, for some reason I can't hear you, and I thought it was my my Zoom, my sound card, but it seems to be okay.
Can you hear me?
Apologies for that. Good. So, where were we? Right, yes. So we're checking to see if there's more than one agent. If there is, then we're going to go for a for loop to go through each of those agents within that cell, including myself. And that's okay, because you might be thinking, well, hang on, I can't infect myself. It doesn't matter, because the first thing we're going to do for each of these agents in that cell, infected or not, if they're not infected, then we will proceed. If they are infected, if they're already infected, I can't infect them again. And that, of course, extends to me, because I'm only going to be able to infect other people if I myself am infected. This method will only get called if I am infected. So if I am infected, then I can't do it. Doesn't matter that I'm also checking myself, because when I get to here, none of this will run because I am infected. So I can't then reinfect myself. But if somebody in that cell is not infected, then there's a risk that I'm now going to infect them. And again, I'm going to use the uniform distribution to determine whether or not that person is infected. And in the same way as we did before for the determining whether the agent is whether the agent is infected at the start. I'm going to check whether the agent passes on their infection. So remember, we said transmissibility is the probability that any agent will infect any other given agent. So we set it to 20%. So this is basically going to randomly roll the dice, going to randomly generate a number between 0 and 1. And if that's less than 0.2, then this uninfected agent is going to be infected. And if that happens, then for that inhabitant that we're looking at, who's not currently infected, they're going to become infected. So I'm going to set their infected attribute to true. I'm then going to set the disease duration in exactly the same way I did if an agent was infected at the start of the model. I'm going to randomly sample from the exponential distribution using the mean length of the disease. And then I'm going to sample that and I'm going to round it up or down. So exactly the same as we did when we're setting up a new agent. So all we're doing here, we're saying, tell me who's in this cell where I am. If it's more than just me, then go through each of us. And if any of us aren't infected, then there's a chance now that they're going to be infected. And if they do get infected, then I need to update their infected Boolean to true. And I need to work out how long they're going to have this disease. So that covers movement and infection. Remember, I said the last thing we want to do is to define a step. So here, we're basically going to tell it, each agent, what it needs to do at each time step in the model. So in our model, what we want is our agents at any time step might move. They may not. They might stay where they are. They might move. They might infect others if they're infected. Obviously, if they're not infected, then we don't want them infecting others because they can't do that. And also, if they're already infected themselves, they might recover. Because remember, they've got disease duration, so they're not going to have it for life. So what we're going to do is we're going to first check whether the agent's going to move on this time step. And that's going to be based on the level of movement probability that we've defined. Then if the agent is infected, the infect function will be called to potentially infect others. And then the agent's disease duration, we want to decrement it by 1 time step. So it will be days in our model, for example. So we'd say, okay, it's now 1 day less that you're going to have this disease. So to take inspiration from the government's, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, I've got move, infect, get better, which probably isn't quite as catchy, but is more relevant for our particular model. So you might move, and then you might infect someone, but you will get better, hopefully. Right, over to you. So I've given you a copy of this model that I've described so far. So with all of these bits, so with the imports, with the agent class defined, and then within the agent class, the constructor method, the init, the move method, and the infect method. So what I want you to do now is to take the disease model x1.py file, open it up in Spider, and then I want you to write the step method that I've just been describing in that person agent class. So it's going to be in the agent class in the same way as your other methods are. So make sure it's indented. And I want you to write the step method. What the method should do, first of all, it's going to randomly determine whether the agent will move on this time step based on the defined probability of this happening. If that is the case, if they are going to move, then you need to make that happen. Remember the functions that are already written. Then you need to get it to start infecting any other agents in the same cell, but only if this agent is infected. So you don't want them infecting other people if they're not infected. And if the agent is infected, their remaining disease duration also needs to be decremented by a day, by one time unit. And if the disease has now run its course, then this needs to be updated in the agent attributes too. So your code, if you've done this correctly, it should run without errors, but it won't appear to do anything because all you're doing at the moment is defining a person agent class. Well, that doesn't do anything. You're just saying, okay, great, I now know what person agent class is. So it won't appear to have done anything, but if it runs without errors, you're probably on the right lines. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit longer. I'm going to give you, I think, 25 minutes in total. And sort of build in a bit of a break there. So we'll resume at 3 o'clock. I'm going to take inspiration from Sean's session this morning, and I'm going to advise you work in small little groups. And I too am going to randomly allocate you to some groups. So make sure you're working the group. Somebody needs to share their screen and have a go at writing this step method within the class. If there are any questions, can you post them in the chat? Because I can't actually hear you. I will switch around and see if I can get my sound working. Sounds like I've covered it. Okay, good. Hopefully I'll get my sound working properly. I may have to just fiddle around with it a bit. But stay on the call. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now, into small little groups. I think it's good to mix you up a little bit as well. So have a go at this. We'll be sort of dropping in and out of the sessions. I'll certainly be going around the sessions, but over the next 25 minutes, we'll resume at 3. Have a go at writing this method. Okay, I'm going to split you into groups now. Okay, so you should all have that, and you should be disappearing in front of my eyes. So click join, and I'll go and have a listen in. Hi, Sean. Are you still in the main room?
Hey, Dad. Yeah.
I can hear you now. Brilliant. I have sound.
Hey.
I thought
had one of the options changed in Zoom on you? Because I've had it do that.
No, I don't know what it was, but I had it coming out. So I was just using my, I wasn't using my headphones except for the microphone, which is clearly working. And all other system sounds were coming out fine from my monitor. But for some reason, Zoom decided it wasn't going to play. I thought it was very quiet because I thought nobody's saying much. Yeah, then I looked. So all I've done, I've gone to my headphones. I basically just sort of unplugged them, plugged them back in. It seems to be working now. So I don't know what on earth is going on.
It does go funny sometimes, and I've found recently the levels, like having to go into.
Okay, so let me share my screen. So what we needed to do was to write the step method, which is basically to define everything the agent is going to do at each time step and in which order. So here, the first thing we want to do is to declare the method. So I've just called it step, and needs to be called step for MESA. So that's very important. You can't call it whatever you like. So def step, and we're just passing in self. And then the first thing we need to do, am I going to move? And so I'm going to use the same structure as I had before. That I'm going to use the uniform distribution, randomly select a number from this, and then check it against my threshold. And in this case, we set up a threshold called level of movement, which is the probability that they will move on any given time step. So we can check against that. If that becomes true, in other words, so if our level of movement is 50%, for example, then if it's between 0 and 0.5, then it will then move. And so all we need to do, we've already told it what to do. If it needs to move, we've written a function called move. And so we simply call that method self.move. So once we've worked out whether they're going to move, we then need to work out if they're going to infect. And the first thing we need to do, we need to check if they're going to infect people, is to check if they are infected themselves. If they're not infected, then none of the rest of this is going to apply because they're not going to be able to infect other people, and they're not going to have a disease that is getting better because they're not infected. So I'm going to say if self.infected is strictly equal to true, remember the double equals for the comparison operator. If that is true, then call the infect method. So the one we wrote back here, which then tells it what to do, and that will go through and check if anybody else is in the cell, and if they are, then randomly infect them. Then we need to decrement the remaining disease duration by 1 time unit because they've got 1 day better. So I'm going to call on the disease duration attribute of myself, and I'm going to reduce that by 1. Remember, this is shorthand for self.disease duration equals self.disease duration minus 1, but we can use this convenient shorthand to do that. And of course, we also need to check, well, if the disease has now run its course, then we need to flag up that the agent's no longer infected. Now, a couple of you identified that what you need to do here, and it may not be intuitive at first. When you're doing this comparison, you need to check not only if it's equal to 0, but if it's less than or equal to 0. And the reason for that is the way we've got it set up. When we first determine a disease duration, so if I go into here, if they've become infected, we randomly sample from the exponential distribution using the mean, and then we round it. If their disease duration is 0.3, for example, then how we've got the model set up at the moment, their disease duration will be rounded to 0. So they will start off with a 0 disease duration. And so when they go back through this loop, their disease duration would then reduce to -1. So it's gone past 0. So we need to check if it's less than or equal to 0 for this to be complete. Now, in reality, you'd probably tidy up having people so they didn't have a disease duration of 0. But it's worth bearing that in mind. And even if you did that as a safety net, it's probably worth having this in play, or even a second sort of elif statement that catches that, so that you can flag up any that have got negative disease durations. So if that is the case, if their disease has run its course, then we simply set their infected Boolean to false, and they are now no longer infected. So writing the agent is as simple as that. We've just written the constructor, which sets up the attributes. We've written the behavior functions, which generally speaking in an agent-based simulation, you're going to have some sort of behavior function and some sort of movement function at the very least, and you probably have multiple versions, particularly of the behavior function. So in this case, we've got infect and move, and then you must have a step method, which basically defines how and when each of these things are called. So that's the agent class. You've now got your agent set up. The next thing we need to do is to write the model class, and the model class will control the agents and their environment, and it will control how the model works. And again, the first thing we need to do whenever we're doing any object-oriented programming is to specify the constructor, the dunder init method. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up in our constructor the number of agents that we want in our model, the grid in which those agents will live, a schedule which will determine the order in which agents will act in each time step, and the starting cells for the agents, so where they're going to start in our model. Now, quick question, can anybody think why it might be important, the schedule is so important, particularly in this model?
Could you then attempt to infect people before you've moved?
Exactly so. So if I was, say we had 2 grid cells and actually, let's say we had 3 grid cells, A, B, and C. Let's say I was in grid cell A and I was infected, and we had another agent in grid cell B and that person is not infected. Now, it may be that the person in grid cell B who's not infected is going to move to grid cell C. Now, if they do that first, before I move into grid cell B, they'll escape infection because they moved before I moved into their cell. But if we had it the other way around, if I move first, then there's a chance they're going to get infected. So the schedule is really important here because, and it may not be for every agent-based simulation, but it is here because whether you've got multiple agents together in a cell is going to determine whether they're at risk of being infected. So it's actually really important to decide who goes first. So this is what our constructor for our disease model class might look like. So here at the top, you can see that I've defined the class and I've called my class disease model. And just as with the person agent class, I'm inheriting. So in the person agent class, I inherited the class of agent from MESA. Here, I'm inheriting the class of model from MESA. So I'm saying I don't need to tell Python what a model is because that's already set up in MESA. I'll just inherit that. I'll use all of that groundwork, and then I'll just add on my own bits. So that's exactly what we do here. And then in our constructor here, we're going to pass in certain information. So I'm going to pass in the n, which represents the number of agents I want, width and height, which represent the number of cells wide and the number of cells high that we want our grid to be. Initial infection, which is basically the probability that any agent is infected at the off. Transmissibility, which remember is the probability that they will infect someone else. Level of movement, and mean length of disease. So all these things that we had to pass into the agent, plus a few little extra bits. So we need the number of agents and also the width and height of the grid. So we need to pass these 4 things in that we're giving to agent because we're going to set up agents within our disease class. Within our disease model class. So we need to pass them in so that they can be passed on to the agent. But these things, the number of agents and the width and height of the grid, they're only going to be used in the model class. The first thing we need to do is set up an attribute called running and set that to true. Don't worry about that. Just know you have to do that. And it's required for the batch runner. If you're using batch runner, which we'll come on to later, batch runner is just a way in which you can run multiple iterations of your model in batch. And you have to have an attribute that says the model is running to do that. So don't worry about that. Just know it's always safest just to include that every time. Then I'm going to store the number of agents. I'm going to call that num agents, that attribute, and I'm going to set that to n, this value I've passed in. So that will determine how many agents we have when we set up the new model. Then I need to set up my grid, so where the agents are going to live. And I'm going to store this grid in self.grid. And I'm going to store this, set up this grid as a multi-grid. Remember, right at the start, we imported multi-grid. And I said that multi-grid is a type of grid in which more than one agent can be in the same cell. And that's going to be important here. So here, I'm setting up a multi-grid. And I'm giving it the width and height that I've passed in. And I'm also passing it this Boolean variable value called true. Now, this true basically means I want a toroidal grid. And all we mean by toroidal is if the agent is on one edge, so let's say they're at the left-hand side of the grid and they move left, then they'll pop out on the right-hand side. Think of Pac-Man. It's basically Pac-Man in Python. So that's what a toroidal grid means. Now you may not want that. You may want to have border effects such that if they're on the left-hand side, they can't move left. And that's fine, just have that as false. But if you do want a toroidal grid, then you'd set that to true. So the next thing we need to do is set up the grid. And we said the schedule is really important. So we need to have a schedule for to determine the order in which agents are activated. Now, in reality, particularly because of this kind of model, where, as we've just said, the order in which they act is going to be really important. So we probably want some way of determining the order in which they move. For the purposes of this, for the training, we're just going to assume that's random. So basically, it's going to be a random. Now, random is a much better way of doing this if you don't know what order they'll act in, than to have the same order each time, because that will introduce bias. It means that if agent 1 always moves before agent 10, then agent 1 always has the chance to get away, if you like. So that can potentially introduce bias into your model. So if you don't know any better, using a random activation can actually be useful, because it says, I don't know, just do it at random. And we'll do this enough times that some effects will be tested. So I'm just going to use a random order. So this will say randomly determine which agents go in which order. And I'm going to set that up using a random activation. And remember, that was one of the imports that we made right at the start. I'm going to set that into the schedule attribute. So now we've got the grid set up, and we've got the schedule set up to be random. So now what we need to do, now we've got our grid where they're going to live, and we've got our schedule, which can determine the order in which they act. Then I'm going to set up, I need to create my agent objects. And because this is object oriented, remember, we're going to create instances of the person agent class. And those will be our agents. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a for loop to go around and do this, create agents for the number of agents that I want. So if I've passed in that I want 100 agents, it'll do this 100 times. So I'm using self.number agents as my range that I'm feeding into my for loop. So for each agent that I want to create, I'm going to create that agent. I'm going to create the instance of the person agent class. Now, remember, one of the things we need to give to the agent is an ID, a unique ID that MESA needs in order to add agents to the schedule. So to come up with my ID, you can come up with an ID however you like, as long as they're unique. What I'm going to do here is just use a really simple, the index value from the for loop. So the first agent round, that value will be 0. So the first agent will have an ID of 0. Second time round, that value will be 1. So the second agent will have a value, an ID of 1, and so on and so on. So it's just a really easy way to give each agent its own ID. Now, remember, the second thing we need to pass into the person agent class is the model. Now, we are in the model. This is the model class. So here we're using the keyword self to say, oh, pass me into that agent. Pass a copy of me as the model into that agent. So that's how we pass in the model into the agent, an instance of that model class. And then we just need to pass in those 4 things which we've already set up in the agent class. Remember, we said we need to pass them in here so we can pass them on to the agent. The initial infection, transmissibility, level of movement, and the mean length of the disease. All of those things we're also going to need to set up the agent. So there's where we use them. Once the agent's been set up, they're now set up in A. So now A is an instance of the person agent class. So that's one of our agents. So I need to add that agent to the schedule. And remember, we've said that the schedule is a random activation schedule. We set that up here. So that says the self.schedule is a scheduler that is that will randomly choose which agent goes when. And again, MESA's done all this for us. We just say, oh, we want a random activation, and MESA will sort that out for us. So we simply add that to our schedule. We add in that agent. That agent has now been, that newly created agent has now been added in to our random activation schedule. Now, the next thing I need to do is to then place that agent somewhere on the grid. Now, what I might want to do to set this up, I might want to say, well, I want to start by spreading out my agents as much as possible. So actually, if there's an empty cell, put the agent into an empty cell first. If you can't find an empty cell, i.e. all of the cells have agents in them already, then just randomly pick a cell and put them in that one, okay? So you could set these up however you like, but that's how I'm going to do it here. I'm going to say, try and put them in empty cells, but obviously if there are, if you've got, 100 cells and there's 200 agents, then you're not going to have enough empty cells so that everybody lives in their own cell at the start. So I'm going to use a try except statement here. So I'm going to, under the try statement, I'm going to say, find me an empty cell. Okay. So, and I can do that, again, MESA's got this wonderful method built into the grid. You can just say find self.grid.find empty, and that will find you a random cell that's empty, that doesn't have any agents in it. And then assign that to the start cell. If that fails, if there is no empty cell, then it'll throw up an error. But because we've put it in a try except statement, rather than stopping the program with that error, it'll go on to the except statement, which we'll look at in a moment. So assuming that it has found an empty cell, it'll store that in start cell. And then all we need to do is use the self.grid.placeagent method to say, and put the agent in that cell. And there's two things that we pass to the Placeagent method. We pass the agent we want to place, which is agent A, and we pass the coordinates of that cell, which we stored in start cell. So find me an empty cell, and then it'll return the coordinates, and then use the Placeagent method to place that agent in that cell. If that fails, as I say, if there wasn't an empty cell, then at this point, Python will come down to here because we're in a try except statement. So it'll say, okay, I couldn't find an empty cell, that threw up an error. So do this instead. So all I'm doing here is just saying, right, randomly pick a cell at random. So here I'm just saying, pick a random value for X in the range given by the width, and pick a random value for Y in the range given for height. So in other words, pick a random column and a random row, and then place the agent using the Placeagent method we did before, agent A, at these coordinates. So rather than using the find empty method to get the coordinates of an empty cell, here we're just randomly picking two coordinates. So if they're all full, we might randomly pick cell 2 across and 3 down or something like that, and we'll pass that in, and that's where we'll place the agent. So that's the constructor. But just as with the person agent, the model class also needs a step function, which again will define what it needs to do at each time step. Now the beauty of this, hello.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
When you define the disease model class, why didn't you need to call the initializer of the model, the super for the model?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know is the answer.
Probably doesn't. Maybe it doesn't do anything. I just, because you have to have it, but it doesn't have to do anything, does it?
No, this is yeah. I'll find out the answer to that because I don't know. Is the answer. So because you would normally do that, but this is double checked against their own tutorial, so I'm guessing it's right. But there must be a reason they don't do that. So I'll see if I can find out what that reason is for you. Because you're right, yeah, you would normally, unless you were rewriting everything, you would normally, maybe that's what it is. Maybe you are literally rewriting everything on it, but I'll double check that because I don't know the answer. Yeah, so the step method, all we need the model step function to do is basically to step forward the schedule, because the schedule will do everything for us. The schedule will say, okay, agent 67, it's your turn now. Do your thing, and then it'll agent 67's step function will then be activated, which you've just written, which tells it, okay, I might move, I might infect someone if I'm already infected, and if I'm already infected, then I might get, then I'll gradually get better. So the schedule will deal with that for you. It'll decide the order, which remember is a random activation in our scheduler. It'll randomly pick an agent and say, right, run your step function. So all we need to do in the model step function is just tell the schedule to step. So we call the step method of the schedule, and that's all we need to do. That single line of code will do that for us in the step method. Okay, so all of that's the entire model written. And hopefully you can see that we've created quite an advanced detailed model there, but actually we've done that using relatively few lines of code. So a lot of this stuff is comments. And actually, if you stripped out all the comments, you see there isn't much to get this set up. We've basically set up an agent class that we've defined with a constructor, and we've set up the attributes for that, and a movement method, an effect method, and a step method. And then for the disease model class, we set up a constructor and a step method. And that's it. That's all we need to do at the moment for our model. So we then set up a separate .py file, a separate module, that will be the run module. Remember, we said we have 3 modules in a MESA model. We have the model module, we have the run module, and we have the server module if we want some live visualization. So here we're going to write the run file. Now the run file will basically just control how the model runs, either as a single run, as a batch of runs, or using a server to visualize the model so we can watch it run. Now, if you were modeling in order to get some results, so for an HSMA project, what you'd probably want to do is to use the server so that you can demo it to people so they can see what's happening. But when you're actually trying to get your results out, you would do a batch run. You would just run the model lots of times really quickly and get it to report the results out to you. So for now, we're just going to run the model as the last of these options, so you can actually get to see all the graphical wizardry where you set up a server and you can see the model play out before you in your web browser. Now, the good news is that if you're using the server based method, then the run file becomes very easy. All you have to do in the run file is tell it to launch the server. That's it. That's the entire file. And it's literally these 3 lines of code, and they'll always be the same. You just say from disease server, import server, you open up the correct port, 8521, and then you tell it to launch, and that's it. So you can literally, if you want to run your model, any agent-based model in MESA as a server, just copy and paste that code. It'll always work. Okay. The run file will be different, as we'll come on to, if you're not running it as a server, if you're running it to get some results out. So that's the run file dealt with. So now we just need to set up the server file to tell it to how to display our model, how to visualize it. So I'm going to call mine disease server .py. So in this file, we're going to specify the visualization. How do we want our model to be visualized in our web browser? So as with all of our Python files, first thing we're going to need to do is to import the libraries we need. So the first thing we're going to do is to import our disease model. That's the one we've written. So the disease model.py file, we need to import the model. We don't need all of it. We just need the disease model class from that. We need the model class. So we say from disease underscore model, that name needs to match whatever comes before the .py in whatever you've saved your model as. So I called mine disease underscore model.py. So I call it from disease model. Import. So if I could have just said import disease model, and that would have imported everything. It would have imported the person agent, it would have imported, and it would have imported the disease model as well. But I only need the disease model imported into the server, the model class. So I'm just saying from disease model, import disease model in capitals, note the capitalization to say import this, which is that thing we've written. So that will now be brought in to our server file. So we can now deal with it as though we've written it in that particular file. So the next thing I'm going to import is something called a canvas grid. And that's just the one of the ways in which we can visualize our agents on our server. And we import that from mesa.visualization.modules, and we import canvas grid. Another thing that I need to import is something called a modular server. That basically just allows us to create a new server to host the visualization of our model. So you'd normally probably have a canvas grid, and you'd normally probably have a modular server as well. So those 2 lines of code you'd probably write each time. And then the last thing is I want to also have my model so that users not only get to watch what's happening in the model, but I want it so that they can change things about the model and see what happens. So what if I were to change the transmissibility rate. What if I were to change the number of agents that are infected at the start, for example? And MESA has this wonderful thing which allows you to really easily set up user interface elements, such as sliders, for example, so the user can change those model parameters just from their web browser. So to do that, I import user settable parameter, and I import that from mesa.visualization.userParam. And again, you'll probably want to do that for most of the model, unless you don't want any user interface. You'd probably want that. So all of these things you'd probably import as they are each time. The only thing that would differ would be your model. That would differ depending on whatever you've called your model and whatever you've called your model class. So in the server module, we need to write what's known as a portrayal function. Now, the portrayal function essentially defines how our agents in our model will be visualized or portrayed. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to set up a portrayal function so that our agents are represented as filled circles with a radius of 0.5, that they're colored red if they're infected, but if they're not infected, then we want them smaller and gray. Okay, so we'll have basically big red circles for infected agents and small gray circles if they're not infected. And the layer value that we'll specify basically determines which ones should go on top if there's more than one in a cell. So if there's a higher value, they go on top. So here I'm going to call my portrayal function agent portrayal. You can call it anything, but the thing I need to pass in is an agent. So this is the way in which I want you to portray an agent. Now we set up the portrayal as a dictionary, and we set it up with all of the key aspects of our portrayal. So I've called my portrayal, just for simplicity. And I've set that up as a dictionary. And I've set up certain key aspects about my portrayal. So I've said I want agents portrayed with the shape as a circle. Filled is true, so I want them to have a filled color. I don't want them to be empty circles. And I want my radius to be 0.5. Okay, so the default way in which agents will be portrayed is as circles that are filled in and with a radius of 0.5. Then what I can do is I can then change certain aspects of that portrayal if certain things are true, because I don't want all of my agents portrayed in exactly the same way. I want to have my infected agents colored red and larger on my grid. So here I can do that. I can put in a conditional logic statement. So I can say if the agent is infected, so if agent.infected is true, then I'm going to change certain aspects of this default portrayal here. So there'll always be circles in my case, although you can change that. But I do want to change the color. So my portrayal color, note the spelling. It has to be in the American spelling. I'm going to set that to red if they're infected. And I'm going to set the layer to 0, so they'll be at the lowest level. If they're not infected, then I'm going to set the color to gray. I'm going to set the R value to 0.2. Now, I didn't set that for if the agent is infected, which means that they'll just use the default, which I've specified as 0.5. But if they're not infected, then they'll use a radius of 0.2, so they'll be smaller. They'll be under half the size. And I want the layer for those uninfected agents to be higher. So essentially what you should have is your infected agents will be big red circles on the bottom. And then if there's an uninfected agent in the same cell, that should appear above them. Okay. So once we've got that portrayal, we've defined how we want our agents drawn on the screen. We now need to set up the elements that are going to make up our visualization. So what we're going to do for now is just set up one visualization element. We're just going to have a grid that contains our agents, and that the agents will be drawn in the way in which we've described in the portrayal function that we just wrote. And I'm going to tell it that I want a grid with has 10 by 10 cells, and I want it to be 500 by 500 pixels. So that's the both the number of cells for the dimensions and also the absolute number of pixels that we want it drawn out on the screen. So I do that by setting up a grid variable. I say that I want that as a canvas grid. Remember, we imported canvas grid. So it knows what a canvas grid is. And I'm just going to pass it the agent portrayal. That was the portrayal that function that I've just set up. That will tell the grid how to draw agents. And then I want it 10 by 10 cells. I want 500 by 500 pixels in size. And that's my grid setup. But remember, I said I also wanted to set up a user interface so that our users could change the parameter values to see how they're going to change the model. So what I want to do, I want to set up 5 sliders in my server, so that the user can choose to change these particular parameter values. I want them to be able to change the total number of agents, the total number of people in the model. I want them to be able to choose the probability that an agent is infected at the start of the model. I want them to be able to change the transmissibility of the disease, i.e. the probability of infecting other people. I want them to be able to change the level of movement, the probability that an agent will move at each time step. And I want them to be able to change how long on average the disease lasts in days, which is our time unit in the model. And you can do this, again, really easily. Remember, we imported the user settable parameter class. So all we need to do is to set up for each user settable parameter. I'm going to set up an instance of that user settable parameter class and pass in the information that it needs. Now I'm just going to have 5 sliders here, so they'll just have lots of little sliders that they can just choose the values. There are other interface elements as well, but just for simplicity, I'm going to go for sliders. So I'm going to set up a slider that allows them to control the number of agents. I've called that the number of agents slider. And I've said that's an instance of the user settable parameter class. The first thing I pass in is the type of interface element. So it's a slider. That's what I want the interface element to be. And because it's a slider, I want to give it a label. So that whatever string of text is here, that will come up next to the slider. So that should be that's your information to the user about what this slider changes. And then I'm going to set up, in this order, the default value, then the minimum value, then the maximum value, and then the increment. So this is what the slider will be at the start by default. This is the minimum that the user can change that value to be on the slider. That's the maximum they can change it to be on the slider. And that's how much they can change it by on each notch of the slider. So here on the number of agents, it'll start off at 20. They can reduce it down to 2 or up to 100, and they can choose agents in values of 1. Obviously, we wouldn't want anything less than whole number increments of agents, because we can't have half an agent. We need whole numbers of agents. I do the same thing with the initial infection slider, set that up as an instance of user settable parameter. I tell it that that's a slider, and that's my label, the probability of initial infection. My default is 0.3, and I want the user to be able to select anything from 0.01, so 1% chance of infection at the start, to 100% chance, everybody's infected at the start. And I want the increment to be 1% increments, so they can choose that, change that by 1% each time. And so on and so on. So I just set up my 5 sliders in exactly the same way. Once I've done that, the final step is just to set up the server itself. And that's going to be comprised basically of the thing I want to visualize, the model it's linked to, and the sliders I want. Okay, so here I'm going to set up a new server, and that's an instance of the Modular Server class, which I imported. I'm going to pass in disease model. Remember, we imported the disease model class that we wrote in our disease model.py file. So we can now refer to it here. So I'm going to pass in that. That's the model I want to visualize. I then need to set up a list of all of the things I want the server to visualize. Now, there's only one thing in my list, but you still have to pass it in as a list. And the one thing in my list is a grid. It's the grid that I set up back here. I said I want a canvas grid that draws agents according to this function, and it's 10 by 10 cells and 500 by 500 pixels. So that's the model I want you to use. That's the list of things, which is just a single element. I want the grid that I've defined. Then I'm going to give the name of the whatever I want to call this thing, and then I'm going to pass in the dictionary. So I should explain. This will come up as the title on your server, on your web page. And then here I'm passing in a dictionary with the user interface elements that I've set up. So remember, we set up these 5 sliders. We called the number of agents slider, initial infection slider, etc., etc. Here is where we link those sliders to the variable values in the model that are being changed. So remember, if we go back to the model class, all the way back here, the number of agents, we pass that in as a value called n. Okay. So that's what I need to link this to. So the bit in inverted commas, the lookup value for that dictionary entry is whatever I'm going to call it in the model. So here I'm passing in a value of n. That's what I've called it in the model. So that's what I need to call it here. And then I'm saying for the lookup value, get that value of n from whatever value is on this slider. So whatever the user picks, that will become your value of n. Similarly, whatever the user picks for initial infection on the initial infection slider, that will become the value for initial infection that we pass in. This will become the value for the transmissibility that we pass in. But these names in inverted commas have to match the variable values that you're using in the disease model class. They must match. That's how it knows which things it's affecting. And we can also set up the width and height of these sliders as well. So you should now have a working model. So you should have, if you've downloaded the materials, you should have a folder called disease_model. And in that folder, there should be 3 files: diseasemodel.py, diseaserun.py, and diseaseserver.py. So let me just show you. So you should have this disease model, not this one, not the one with data collectors. You should have this one, disease model. If you go into that, you should see there are these 3 PY files. And those 3 PY files are what we're going to be running now. So I want you to open up those 3 PY files in Spider and then run the diseaserun.py file. Okay, has to be run. You can't run any of the other 2. They won't work on their own. You have to run it from the diseaserun.py file. So push F5, make sure you're in the diseaserun.py file, which tells it to set up a server. And in setting up the server, it imports the model, and the model then runs. That's basically how it works. I want you to spend just the next 15 minutes. Well, actually, let's say 10 minutes. We're running a bit short of time. Spend the next 10 minutes just playing around with the model. Play around with the sliders, see how things change. Click on the About button, and you'll see some information that we put so earlier. I don't think I mentioned this. Where are we? Here we go. So I skipped over this, but back in the disease model class, you'll notice I put in this comment. Remember, you can put 3 inverted commas before and after comment to have a multi-line comment. In MESA, if you do that in the model class, that first comment that uses that notation, that will be your about information. So if the user clicks the about button, that message will appear. Okay, so you can type in whatever you like. That's going to be a message to your user, basically. So have a play about with that, and then read back through the code to make sure you understand it's working. So a few things you'll need to note. If you change the sliders, you'll then also need to click reset at the top of the model to reset and kick in the new values. If you close the model, so if you close the browser window and then you want to launch it again, you'll also have to restart the kernel because the port will be blocked otherwise. So I think quite a few are used to doing this. So you can just hit Control and dot as long as you're in the IPython window, so as long as you're selected down here. Or you can click on this, the 3 little lines, and click Restart Kernel there. So you'll need to do that, otherwise you'll run into problems. The biggest thing, this might not work for you. We have had issues with this before, because essentially you are trying to open a port on your computer and telling it to launch a server. Your IT department may not allow you to do that. So it's possible that this will not work for all of you, or even some of you, or even all of you. So this will be interesting to give it a try. If it doesn't work, don't panic too much, because, as I say, if you were doing this in reality, you wouldn't need to run it as a server anyway. But it is useful to do that. I'm going to split you into a smaller number of groups just for the next 10 minutes or so, just to have a play around with this. So hopefully for somebody this will work. So I'll just show you what you'll need to do. I'll open up the files myself. I'm going to disease model. I need to open all 3. And then in my disease run, I need to push F5. And that should appear. It should open up a browser, and this should appear. And then you'll have the option to start, to step. So start, if you click start, that will start the model running. If you click step, it'll go 1 step at a time. And if you click reset, it'll reset, and you'll be able to see that you can change all of these sliders, etc. So have a go. I'm going to put you into random breakout rooms again. Have a go at this. Hopefully, at least some of you will be able to do this. If not, I'll demo it for you. So have a go, and we'll just come back in just under 10 minutes. Stop sharing. So yeah, so that's all great, but obviously the real value of most modeling is being able to extract results, collect results from our model. So it'd be really useful to do that here too. So we'd like to collect data throughout the running of our model so that we can collect the results, and we might want to put them on a graph, for example. And in MESA, we can do that really easily using something called data collectors. And you remember right back at the start, I said that we imported something called a data collector at the start of the disease model.py file, and I said I'll come on to that later. Well, now we're going to use it. We're going to use this way of collecting and reporting data. So let's set up a data collector that's going to monitor the total number of infected agents over time. Okay, that'd be really useful to know if we're doing some pandemic modeling. So what we're going to need to do, first of all, we're going to need to write a function that will calculate the result we want to collect. So in this case, total number of agents infected, and we'll put that in the disease model module. And we'll do that as a standalone function in that module, i.e. not within a class. It'll just be within the disease model.py file. We'll have a standalone function outside of the 2 classes that will basically calculate the result, i.e. the total number of agents infected at any time. Now, I say we, it may have been slightly misleading because I want you to do this. So I want you to write the calculate number infected function in the disease model.py file. So remember, this is going to be a standalone function in the module. It's not a method of one of the classes. So make sure you don't put it in either the person agent class or the disease model class. It needs to stand separate. And what the function needs to do is it needs to accept a single input of a MESA model object. I'd recommend just calling it model here, as we've done elsewhere. It should set up a counter that will keep count of the total number of infected agents in the model over time. And obviously that should start at 0. The function needs to set up a list of agents in the model that can be obtained by accessing, sorry, I'll start saying that again, I've said that one. So you can get a list of agents in the model by accessing the schedule.agents on the model object. So whatever your model object is, if you access schedule.agents on it, that will return a list of all of the agents in your model. I want you to use that information with a list comprehension to generate a new list which contains the Boolean infected attribute of each agent in the schedule. Okay, so let me just say that again. So you can grab a list of your agents in the model, of every agent in the model, via essentially model.schedule.agents. Use that alongside a list comprehension to generate a new list which contains the Boolean infected attribute of each agent in the schedule. Remember, each agent object has an infected attribute that either says true or false. So I want you to grab whether each agent is infected or not, whether their infected value says true or false. And then I want you to loop through that list, that new list that you've created through list comprehension, to count up how many infected agents there are, and then update the counter that you set up at the start of the function, and then return that number as the output to the function. So the function will take as an input the model. It will then set up a counter which starts at 0. It'll then grab the list of all of the agents in the model, and then use a list comprehension to generate a new list which contains trues and falses to indicate whether each agent is infected or not. Then it'll loop through that list to count up how many infected agents there are. It'll update the counter as it goes, and then once it's done that, it'll return that number as an output from the function. So this all uses stuff that you've seen, but just think carefully about how you would do this. It's easier than you think, but just think about each step broken down. Now, because we're running a bit over time, I'm going to give you a little bit less time to do this than I normally would, but I'm going to get you to do this in your groups. So get somebody to be in charge, and then all sort of contribute into the coding. I'm going to give you just about 15 minutes to do this. Okay, so until just after 4:15. So I'll split you into your groups now. And have a go at writing this function, but remember it needs to be in the disease model.py file, and it needs to be separate to the 2 class definitions that you've got in there. Okay, let me put you into your rooms. There we go, resume. Okay, so I'm going to show you my solution, and then I'm going to just briefly mention a better solution, which one of the groups came up with, which I was really delighted to see that that you guys have really picked up on list comprehension stuff. So here's the solution as I described it. So I've defined my calculated number of infected, pass in the model, set up a counter starting at 0 called total infected, could be anything you like, and then here, basically, I want to create a list of trues and falses representing whether each agent is infected or not. And so I use my list comprehension here, and I say it's for each. A couple of people sort of picked up on this. I think it's a good way to think about it. If you think about things in reverse, so think about what is it? What am I looking in? I'm looking in model schedule.agents because I told you that's where that will return a list of all of the agents in the model. So that's the thing I'm looking in. And then for each, and you could call this anything you like as long as it's consistent with the other thing. So for each agent in that list, for each element essentially, but I'll refer to them as agents, give me the infected status of that agent. So agent.infected for each agent in model schedule agents. That will then return a list of trues and falses indicating whether each agent is infected or not. And then I can just use a for loop going through that list, and then say if each element is true, then increment my counter by 1, and then return that number. And I was delighted to see that one of the groups had picked up on the fact that you could have skipped all of this and done the whole thing in a list comprehension, which is by far the preferable solution. You could have just said agent.infected for agent in model.schedule.agents if agent.infected is strictly equal to true, and then you'd only had a list of those that were actually infected, and then you could just return the length of that list. So that's an even more elegant way to tackle that. Okay, so the last thing I'm just going to talk about is how you would, so that's how we'd set up the function to calculate that number. That's the metric we're monitoring over time. So the last thing we need to do is get that data collector running. So we're going to set up the data collector, we're going to tell it the function that we've just written is what's known as a model reporter, i.e. that it's reporting results for us that we want it to collect. So in the disease model class, at the end of the constructor, we'd insert the following line of code, and we say the data collector in this disease model is an instance of data collector, and here are the model reporters and here are the agent reporters. You can have both model reporters and agent reporters, but this is these are results about the model because it's looking at the meta level of how many agents are infected in the model. So we set up that as model reporters. We set up as a dictionary with the name of the outcome that we're reporting, and then the function that is going to be used to calculate that. So that's the function we've just written: calculate number infected. Okay, and then total infected is what we're going to call it. And what we call it here is important because we're going to need to reference that in a second. Obviously, if you have more than one outcome being reported, then you'd include more than one entry in the dictionary. We also need to tell the model that at each step of the model, we want it to collect from the data collector. So we need to add an instruction in the step method of the disease model class to tell it to do that. So before, we only had an instruction to step forward the schedule. We're now going to add in an extra thing that says, tells the data collector to collect, to do its thing, basically. And all we need to do is say self.datacollector.collect and then feed in itself to that, because of course that we've already defined what the data collector is going to do over here, and we said it's going to collect total infected as a model reporter, and it's going to do that by running the calculated number infected function, which you just wrote a minute ago. Once we've got that, we've got the model collecting the number of infected people over time. All we need to do now is decide how we're going to output it. So I'm going to, just for the purposes of demoing this, I'm going to get it to draw a graph that's a dynamic graph so that it plots the number of infected people over time as the model runs. So I'd go back into the disease server to do that. And I simply need to change three things. I'm first going to add a chart module import to my list of imports. So that allows us to draw graphs as one of our visualizations. I'm then going to set up the graph, specify how I want it to look. And I basically set that up. So remember, before we had grid equals. Here I'm going to set up another element that I want to visualize, which is my graph. I've called it total infected graph. And it's an instance of the chart module, which I've just imported. And I'm setting up the attributes as I would before. So I want the label to say total infected, and I want the color of the line to be red. And importantly, the data collector name, the name of the thing that it's plotting, the data that it's plotting is going to come from this data collector, which I've just called data collector, because that was the one that we set up. I appreciate I'm zipping through this, but I'm conscious of the time. So do have a look at this in more detail when you have a chance. And then the last thing we need to do is simply to add this to the list of things we want to set up, the list of visualization elements that we want to set up when we set up the server. So remember before, we set up server equals modular server, and we did all this, and we just had a list of elements that we want to visualize, and before it was just the grid. But now I just simply add, and also this total infected graph, which is the thing I've just specified here. So that's the only change. So all we need to do, extra import to import the chart module, then set up this visualization element for the graph, specify how it should look, the label, the color of the line, and the data it's going to plot. And then add it to the list of things you want the server to visualize. And that will then work. So let me show it to you so you can see it running. Close that down. I need to restart my kernel. Let's close that. And then once that's restarted, so you can view this yourself in the, I've given you the files for this, the disease model with data collectors. So you can go in and play with this yourself. If I open these up, and then I go into run as I did before, push F5. There we go. And that's not worked. Okay. This happened once before, and I don't know how to fix it. So I'm just going to try that again. Let's close down the browser. Looks more promising. Here we go. Hooray. Right, it's worked. So you can now see it's exactly the same as it was before, except this time we've also got a graph. And this will monitor the total number of infected over time. So if I click Start, we can see that will now dynamically show us the total number of infected people in our model over time. So we start off quite high in this scenario, and then it's gradually deteriorating and deteriorating, a little bit of fluctuation. So this looks a little bit like our sort of summer, except that didn't happen. If I were to play around with that, so I might want to start with much more movement, higher level of transmissibility, and many more people infected at the start, and maybe the disease lasts a little bit longer. So if I was to do that, let's reset. So you can see here now, we start with a higher number of people, and actually things aren't improving much because people are moving about lots. They're passing it on. There's a high level of infection. The disease is lasting quite a while, and there's quite a lot of them infected at the start. So it's a little bit more like what we've seen, although still that seems to be panning out a little better than what we've got. But you can see you can monitor over time that the number of infections goes down, but then you might have a little peak, and then things start rising again. So you can see here it's starting to get much worse again. So you can play around with that. So do have a play around with that in those files. I'm going to stop there because that's the end. So I managed to whistle through that last bit quite quickly. So as I do have a play with that, if you're interested in agent-based simulation, then we will have the follow-on session for this module in December, where you'll get to add on a bit more to this model. So we'll show you how to do things like run the model lots and lots of times automatically, and there's stuff built into MESA to allow you to do that really easily. And the nice thing about MESA is it allows you to say, for example, okay, I want to test this, and I want to test lots of different combinations of infection rates and transmissibility and level of movement between these ranges. So I want to test everything between 0.1 and 0.5 for level of movement, etc. And what MESA will do, you can just tell it that that's what you want to do, and it will automatically work out all the scenarios for you, and it'll run them all for the amount of time you specify, and then report back the results automatically. It's a really nice feature of MESA that allows you to do that. So we'll go into that and some of the more advanced features of MESA in more depth if you come to the second session on agent-based simulation. In the meantime, I hope that's been an interesting insight into, particularly in light of the current situation in the world, about how some of this disease modeling works. And indeed, I even saw some of you earlier testing out lockdown style restrictions by reducing level of movement, etc., and seeing how that was affecting the dynamics in the system. So hopefully it gives you a bit of insight into how these sort of things work. And hopefully it spurred on some potential ideas about agent-based simulations for potential HSMA projects. So do be thinking about that. As a reminder, just before we close off, we are only a few weeks away from the deadline now where you will need to be submitting your project pitch videos. So you do need to be thinking very carefully now about what your projects are going to be. You'll have seen that I posted on Slack the other day a reminder of the module descriptors. So for those modules that you haven't yet seen, which is a few of them, only a few of them now, mainly around natural language processing, machine learning, and the deep reinforcement learning stuff, and Sean's R stuff, which will obviously be next week. So there's only a few bits that you haven't seen at all. So just make sure that you've got an understanding of what some of those methods can do, because that you may well have project ideas that fall into natural language processing or machine learning, which we'd love to have you put forward. But do be thinking about those potential project ideas now now's the time to be considering that and start thinking about what those ideas are. Start talking to people in your organizations so that you can start assembling the ideas for your pitch. And also, as a reminder, anybody that's putting forward a pitch will need to undertake a Python assessment on the 3rd of December between 10 and 11 a.m. That will be set on Slack. It will be posted up, and you will have 1 hour to undertake the assessment. Kerry has very kindly volunteered to try out the assessment that I've written tomorrow to make sure that I haven't made it too difficult. So she'll be able to give me a nice gauge of whether I've got the level pitched correctly for this. But that will be an assessment on your core Python skills, which, to be honest, having seen what a lot of you guys have been doing, the exercises, I think you'll be fine with that. Any questions before we close off? No? Everybody's probably very tired, and understandably so.
Dan,
hello.
There's one thing regarding the last simulation. Your grid size was 10 by 10. Mm-hmm. So it constrained the agents within it, didn't it? So
yeah.
If you put 100 agents in, they haven't got much room to move, have they? So is there something around how you would put the size of your grid to make it more real world in relation to the number of agents?
So in reality, so the other thing I didn't mention was that so we've only been dealing with smaller numbers of agents in that comparative to the grid as well. And the way we set up the visualization, if there was more than one uninfected agent within a cell, you'd only see one because they're all drawn in the center. So that probably wouldn't be the way in which you would visualize it for real. It's just a way to show you some of the ways in which you can do that. So if you're doing this in reality, what you'd probably have, and as you've probably seen, Sage stuff come out when they put up their PowerPoints and stuff for some of this stuff, you probably have like a heat map type thing where each grid cell would be colored slightly differently, so that the more infected, maybe the darker the color or something like that. So in reality, you'd probably, if you were doing this for real, you'd have that kind of visualization. But yeah, absolutely, thinking about how you would visualize that will be really important, a really important aspect of thinking about a model like this. But yeah, in reality, you'd probably do that slightly differently to the visualization we've got set up there. But the great thing is MESA allows you to do all sorts of different visualizations really easily, and it all uses the same format. You just specify how you want the thing to look, basically. Great. Any other questions? No? Excellent. Okay, well, now the next time you see a Sage presentation, you can understand a bit more about how they got there. And hopefully it's got you a bit interested in agent-based simulation at the same time. I forgot to mention earlier as well, I should have mentioned it when I plugged my book, which has sold an amazing 2 copies in 10 years. If you do want to read my PhD thesis, it is freely available. You don't have to buy it in book format. And if anybody's interested, I can share the link. It's particularly if you're interested in agent-based simulation, it's reading through elements of that might be quite useful for you.
So did you spill coffee on the first copy you bought?
No,
Or you did buy the second one?
I genuinely don't know who bought those copies because it doesn't count mine. I do have a copy, but none of my family or friends bought a copy, despite me much pestering. But I have no idea who bought it. What was quite amusing was that shortly after it was published, there were copies going for £150 on Amazon. I'm not quite sure who thought they could sell it for that, but there we are. So I would say there's a market, but there's clearly not because the sales aren't great. But never mind. If I see a sudden sales spike now, I'll know who to thank. Brilliant. Okay, thanks guys. Hope you enjoyed today. And Sean will next week be your tutor all day, where he'll be taking you through the pirate-themed programming language that is R. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Cheers.
See you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.